Welcome to the History Maps podcast. So, a megalopolis enclosed by a brick wall measuring over 13 kilometers in circumference.
Yeah, it's a massive scale.
It really is. And inside those massive fortifications, you don't just find palaces and monasteries. You find an entirely self-contained agricultural zone.
Right.
Like half of the protected space within this city is dedicated exclusively to growing rice, engineered specifically to withstand a siege that could last for years.
Yeah, which is completely counter to how we usually think about ancient cities.
Exactly. When we conceptualize the blueprint of an ancient civilization, there is a tendency to envision a single, highly centralized monolith. We expect a historical map to feature a bold star marking the sole capital city, with all political and economic power radiating outward from that defining center.
Right, that deeply ingrained Roman-centric view of history where all roads must lead to one specific place.
But stepping into the world of the Pyu City-States in ancient Southeast Asia requires a complete reassessment of how power structures are built and maintained. We're looking at a landscape of influence that operates much more like a decentralized constellation rather than a singular sun.
Yeah, it's a completely different model.
Right.
What we are examining today is a comprehensive exploration of a highly sophisticated network of urban centers.
Right.
These city-states dominated the Irrawaddy Valley in present-day Upper Myanmar for roughly a millennium. And, this network serves as the critical bridge spanning the deep history of the Bronze Age all the way to the rise of the pagan kingdom in the late 9th century.
So to understand the Pyu, we really have to examine the physical landscape they eventually occupied.
Definitely.
Because long before they arrived, the Irrawaddy River Valley was already a hub of human development. The sources indicate we have archaeological evidence of Paleolithic cultures living near the Irrawaddy as far back as 11,000 BCE.
Yeah, 11,000 BCE.
Let's establish what life in 11,000 BCE actually looked like in this specific region. If you look at the banks of the Irrawaddy during that period, what kind of human activity are you observing?
Well, you would be observing the Enyathian culture,
Okay.
which is characterized primarily by their stone tool industry. They were heavily reliant on fossil wood and silicified tuff to create choppers and hand adzes.
We are talking about human habitation occurring concurrently with the lower and middle Paleolithic eras in Europe, but the environment and the resources here dictate a completely different lifestyle, right?
Exactly. The Irrawaddy River was the central artery of their existence. It provided fresh water, fish, and a corridor for migrating game.
Right, and the climate was changing too.
Yeah, the climate would have been shifting out of the last glacial period, making the region increasingly humid and forested. So it was a hunter-gatherer existence, but one deeply tethered to the rhythmic, seasonal flooding of the river system.
They didn't build permanent structures that survived in the archaeological record, though.
No, but their sustained presence over thousands of years indicates a deep familiarity with the ecological cycles of the valley.
And that familiarity, it lays the groundwork for what comes next. The technological progression in this region doesn't stall, it accelerates.
It really does.
The sources show that by 1500 BCE, the people living there were working with copper and bronze. They were domesticating chickens and pigs, and they were cultivating rice.
Yeah, and that transition from stone to metallurgy fundamentally alters how a society interacts with its environment.
How so?
Well, by 1500 BCE, we see the emergence of localized copper mining and smelting. And smelting copper requires the construction of clay furnaces capable of reaching over 1,000 degrees Celsius.
Which is incredibly hot.
Right, which in turn requires a massive, organized collection of specific types of hardwood for charcoal. So the people here weren't just shaping metal, they were mastering thermodynamics.
And they were combining this copper with tin to create bronze tools and weapons.
Exactly. These bronze tools cleared forests much more efficiently than stone axes, which directly facilitated the expansion of rice cultivation.
And the domestication of animals plays into this too.
Yeah, domesticating pigs and chickens provided a reliable, stationary protein source. That reduces the reliance on nomadic hunting.
So it creates a feedback loop.
Right. Better tools lead to more food, which leads to stationary, growing populations.
And that feedback loop leads directly into the Iron Age. The records show that by 500 BCE, iron-working settlements began to emerge, particularly in the area south of present-day Mandalay.
Yeah, the Salmon River Valley is a key site for this.
Right, we see burial sites from this era. What does an Iron Age settlement in the Salmon River Valley look like at this point, right before the Pyu arrive?
Well, settlement there around 500 BCE to the year 200 reveals a highly structured, wealthy, and interconnected society.
Okay.
Excavations have uncovered extensive burial sites filled with large earthenware pots and elaborately decorated wooden and bronze coffins.
And what's inside these graves?
Inside, archaeologists find iron tools, bronze axes, and ornaments made of glass and semi-precious stones.
So iron is really the critical factor here.
It is. Iron ore is more abundant than copper or tin, but it requires much higher temperatures to smelt.
Like around 1500 degrees Celsius, right?
Exactly. And the societies here had mastered this. Furthermore, the artifacts found in the Saman Valley provide concrete evidence that these rice-growing settlements were already engaging in long-distance trade with China.
Wow, already trading with China.
Yeah, they were importing carnelian beads and specific types of bronze artifacts. So the landscape was fertile, technologically advanced, and firmly integrated into regional trade networks.
So into this highly developed Iron Age landscape arrived the Pyu.
Right.
The sources describe them as Tibeto-Burman speakers, migrating from the Qinghai Lake region, which is in modern-day Qinghai and Gansu provinces in north-central China.
Yeah, way up north.
And they moved down through present-day Yunnan, using river systems to enter the Irrawaddy River Valley around the 2nd century BCE.
It's a massive journey.
To understand this migration, we have to look at the physical logistics. You are taking a population from the harsh, high-altitude environment of the Tibetan Plateau and moving them thousands of miles south.
The physical logistics of that migration are, well, they're immense. The Qinghai Lake region is characterized by high-altitude steppes, cold winters, and a reliance on pastoralism.
Like herding yaks and sheep.
Right. And for reasons likely related to climate shifts or population pressures from neighboring nomadic groups, these Tibeto-Burman speakers began moving south.
They follow the natural topography.
Yeah, descending through the rugged mountainous terrain of Yunnan. They utilized the Taping and Shueli rivers as natural corridors.
And those rivers cut through dense malarial jungles and steep gorges.
Exactly. The sensory shift for these migrating families would have been profound. They moved from a dry, cold, high-altitude environment into a humid, monsoonal, deeply forested river valley.
It wasn't just a single rapid march, though.
No, not at all. It was a gradual, generational movement filtering down the river valleys over decades or centuries.
I look at this Pyu migration as a long-distance agricultural transplanting process.
That's a good way to put it.
You take a resilient culture, accustomed to surviving in a marginal northern climate, and you place them into a fertile, river-fed plain. Once they reach the specific confluence of the Irrawaddy and Chindwan rivers, the growth is explosive.
Yeah, the scale of the civilization they went on to build is unprecedented in the region. They didn't merely establish a few isolated villages. They integrated with the existing Iron Age populations and established a massive presence stretching across the Irrawaddy Basin.
And centuries later, the Chinese records note this.
Right. Tang Dynasty records documented the existence of 18 distinct Pyu states.
And out of those 18, 9 were heavily fortified walled cities.
Yes, and their administrative reach covered 298 districts. To achieve that level of expansion, they had to make deliberate geographical choices about where to settle.
The sources indicate they concentrated their settlements in 3 main irrigated regions of Upper Burma: the Mu River Valley in the north, the Kayakse Plains in the center, and the Minbu region in the south and west.
Right.
Why those 3 specific areas? The Irrawaddy Valley is massive.
Well, those 3 regions sit within what is known as the dry zone of central Myanmar. The monsoon weather patterns drop heavy rain on the coastal areas and the surrounding mountains, but the central plains receive a fraction of that rainfall.
So relying solely on rainfall for agriculture in the dry zone is precarious.
Very precarious. However, the Mu, Kayakse, and Minbu regions feature secondary river systems that flow down from the well-watered highlands into the dry Irrawaddy Basin.
Oh, okay.
By settling in these specific tributary valleys, the Pyu had access to constant water flow that could be engineered. They recognized that the soil was incredibly fertile, provided it could be reliably watered.
So they took the Iron Age agricultural foundation they found and scaled it up exponentially. And transitioning from a migratory people to inhabitants of massive permanent settlements requires mastering the local hydrology. You cannot support walled cities covering hundreds of hectares just by hoping for a good rainy season.
No, you have to actively control the water, specifically for the cultivation of japonica rice.
Right. Their entire economy, urban expansion, and survival were predicated on the cultivation of japonica rice.
Yeah, japonica is a short grain variety that yields high caloric returns, but it requires sustained, shallow flooding during its growth cycle.
And to achieve the massive surpluses required to feed an urban population in the dry zone, the Pyu became masterful hydraulic engineers.
They really did. They developed complex irrigation systems perfectly adapted to the local topography. They surveyed the land to understand the natural gradients and seasonal flood levels.
And then they constructed a network of weirs.
Right, a weir is a low dam built across a river to raise the level of water upstream or regulate its flow.
So by raising the water level, they could divert it.
Yes, into a network of primary and secondary canals, gently guiding the water across thousands of hectares of prepared paddy fields.
The oldest scientifically excavated urban site we have for the Pyu is Bigthano, situated in the irrigated Minbu region.
Yeah, Big Thano is a key site.
The remains there date from 200 BCE to the year 100, and Bigthano is massive. The sources describe a fortified settlement encompassing approximately 300 hectares inside a rectangular grid.
It's huge.
How does a society in the 1st century BCE construct something on that scale?
Well, the physical construction of Big Thana requires a highly organized labor force and specialized knowledge of materials.
The brick walls alone.
Right. The walls and fortifications surrounding it measured 6 meters thick.
6 meters.
Yeah, and these weren't simple mud barriers. The Pyu used large fired bricks.
Producing millions of fired bricks requires excavating massive amounts of clay, molding it, drying it, and then firing it in kilns.
Exactly. And the kilns demand continuous supplies of timber, which means logging operations running concurrently with construction.
So a 6-meter thick wall is obviously designed to withstand monumental force, but the fortifications also reveal their engineering prowess regarding water management.
Yes, they shared a specific type of urbanism across their network. Their walled spaces often featured one entire side sealed by a massive water tank or reservoir.
We generally default to thinking of ancient city walls purely as defensive military structures designed to repel an invading army.
Right, the traditional view.
But if you have an entire side of a city sealed by a reservoir, the walls seem to serve a completely different primary function. Were the Pyu walls essentially hydraulic infrastructure designed to manage seasonal flooding, direct canals, and retain water storage just as much as they were built for military defense?
The archaeology strongly supports the premise that these walls were dual-purpose infrastructure.
Interesting.
Settling in valleys like the Yin River Valley, where Big Thano is located, required the Pyu to manage extreme seasonal variations. Heavy monsoonal runoff followed by long, dry periods.
So the walls acted as massive retention basins.
Right. By incorporating a reservoir into the defensive perimeter, the walls channeled and contained water for agricultural use during the dry season, while simultaneously protecting the city from catastrophic seasonal floods.
So the same earthworks that stopped an invading army also stopped the floodwaters and held the drinking supply.
Exactly. Their survival depended on an intimate engineered relationship with local water conditions.
And a system that can reliably irrigate hundreds of hectares of japonica rice creates a massive caloric surplus. What does that surplus mean for the daily lives of the people living inside Big Thano or the other Pyu cities?
Well, agricultural surplus is the foundational engine of social complexity.
Right.
In a subsistence society, nearly 100% of the population must work in food production just to survive the year. But when you engineer a system that produces a massive surplus, you free up human capital.
So people can do other things.
Exactly. That caloric surplus allows the society to feed dedicated masons and brickmakers who build the 6-meter thick walls. It supports full-time metallurgists working with iron and bronze to forge tools and weapons.
It supports artisans crafting jewelry, merchants organizing trade caravans.
And an entire monastic class dedicated to spiritual and intellectual pursuits.
So the social hierarchy fundamentally shifts.
It does. You see the emergence of a centralized administration capable of collecting that surplus, often as a form of taxation, and redistributing it to fund public works and specialized labor.
The Pyu moved from an agrarian survival model to a highly specialized, stratified urban society.
Perfectly said.
And once those basic survival needs, agricultural requirements, and defensive structures were established through water control, the Pyu didn't stop at pure utility. They began designing these massive urban spaces to mirror their understanding of the universe.
Yeah, the layout of Pyu cities represents a synthesis of indigenous architectural traditions and imported Indian cosmological concepts.
Can you give an example?
Sure, the city-state of Myanmar, located in the Kyoxi region, is a primary example. Mingmall was enormous. It measured 2.5 kilometers in diameter, covering 222 hectares.
Wow.
And the city featured two distinct enclosure walls. The inner wall was constructed as a perfect circle, while the outer wall was a square.
Building a massive circular wall inside an equally massive square wall is a deliberate geometric choice that requires extensive surveying and planning.
It is a physical manifestation of a mandala.
Okay.
In many ancient Asian traditions, the plan of a circle within a square suggests a zodiac sign, representing a view of the heavens from the perspective of the sun. The square represents the earthly plane, with its four cardinal directions, while the inner circle represents the celestial realm.
So the Pyu were building a physical model of the cosmos on the ground.
Exactly.
It functions like a giant physical astrolabe or a cosmic clock constructed out of millions of fired bricks. Every street, every gate, and every wall is positioned to serve a specific astronomical and spiritual function. The sources note this is reflected in the gates as well, with many cities featuring exactly 12 gates.
Yeah, and the 12 gates directly align with the 12 signs of the zodiac. According to architectural historians, this adoption of Indian concepts of city planning incorporated a belief in the world axis.
The world axis.
Yeah, in this cosmological framework, the centermost point of a properly constructed mandala city connects directly, via an invisible vertical axis, with the Tavatimsa heaven.
And Tabatimsa is a crucial concept in Buddhist cosmology.
It is. It's the realm of the 33 gods, located at the peak of Mount Meru, the center of the universe.
So the Pyu believed that aligning their physical city with the celestial realm and placing the palace near that central axis would ensure prosperity, order, and divine favor throughout the kingdom.
Right. It was all spiritually connected.
This precise floor plan was heavily replicated across the network, too. The city of Banaka, also in the Kyoxid region, features a layout virtually identical to Mingma.
Yes, Banaka is a great site for understanding their material culture.
The excavations there provide a highly detailed view of the wealth and craftsmanship the civilization produced. The sources detail findings of acid-etched onyx beads, amber, jade, and stone molds, specifically designed for casting gold and silver ornamental flowers.
The presence of stone molds for gold casting indicates a highly refined metallurgical industry.
How did they cast the gold?
Well, to cast gold, artisans would carve intricate floral patterns into a hard stone mold. They would then melt gold in small crucibles, which requires precise temperature control.
Right.
And then they'd pour the molten metal into the stone cavities. Once cooled, these delicate gold flowers were likely used to adorn statues, clothing for the elite, or as religious offerings.
That's incredibly delicate work.
It is. And alongside the jewelry tools, excavations at Banaka recovered precious stone images of elephants, turtles, and lions.
And carving miniature animals out of hard, semi-precious stone requires specialized microtools and immense patience.
Exactly. The material culture was exceptionally rich, indicating a society with deep pockets and a taste for luxury goods.
The architectural vocabulary they developed during this period became the enduring blueprint for the region, too.
It did.
The sources mention that when archaeologists excavated 4th century monasteries at Bekthano, they found the floor plans are largely identical to the later 13th century Samingi monastery at Pagan.
Yeah, they were drafting the spatial rules for centuries of subsequent Southeast Asian monastic building.
But even with this shared architectural language and cosmological design, the political center of gravity across the Pyu network was not static.
No, it shifted over time.
The balance of power moved over the centuries, which brings us to a transition in dominance, looking at two vastly different capitals, Alain in the north and Sriksetra in the south.
Right. Halin, also known as Halangi, was the northernmost major Pyu city, situated in the Mu Valley.
And it was founded very early on.
Yeah, it was founded very early in the Pyu era. Radiocarbon dating from its massive wooden gates points to the year 70.
The year 70. And Holland covered 664 hectares, making it nearly twice the size of Bekthano.
Right, and its overall shape was rectangular, but it notably featured curved corners rather than sharp angles.
The geographical integration at Halin is notable. It featured a moat on 3 sides, but the 4th side was intentionally dammed to create reservoirs.
Yeah, continuing that Pyu signature of blending defense with water management.
But the true foundation of Halin's long-standing power and wealth came from its control over a specific commodity, salt.
Salt was an immensely valuable, highly strategic resource during the first millennium.
Because before refrigeration, salt was the primary method for preserving fish and meat.
Exactly, which was critical in the tropical climate of Southeast Asia. It was an essential dietary requirement for both humans and livestock, and it functioned as a form of hard currency in regional trade.
And Helen was situated near natural brine wells.
Yes, the mechanics of salt production involved drawing brine from these wells and boiling it down in large earthenware vats over continuous fires until only the solid salt crystals remain.
Which requires massive amounts of firewood and organized labor.
Right. Helen's monopoly over local salt production allowed it to amass incredible wealth and maintain its status as the premier Pyu City-State for centuries.
But the economic landscape eventually shifted.
It did.
Helen was superseded by a city at the complete opposite end of the Pyu realm. Down in the south, near modern-day Pyu, the city of Sri-Kshetra was founded between the 5th and 7th centuries.
Yeah, and if Helen was a major urban center, Sri-Kshetra was a true megalopolis.
Sri-Kshetra was the largest Pyu site ever constructed. It occupied roughly 1,400 hectares.
To put that into perspective, its circular brick walls had a circumference of over 13 kilometers.
And the walls themselves stood 4.5 meters high.
Yes, the perimeter was pierced by 12 massive gates, each guarded by large stone deities, and the city featured a monumental solid pagoda at each of its 4 cardinal corners.
So Sri-Kshetra claimed the status of the premier Pyu city from the 7th or 8th century and held that position until the civilization's decline in the 9th century.
Right.
The internal layout of Sri-Kshetra reveals a highly strategic approach to urban planning and threat assessment. The southern half of the city contained the palace complex.
And that was a massive rectangular structure, measuring 518 by 343 meters.
The southern zone also housed the monasteries, the administrative buildings, and the dense residential housing.
But the entire northern half of this walled city was strictly dedicated to agricultural land, specifically rice fields.
Enclosing hundreds of hectares of rice paddies within the defensive walls is a monumental engineering feat.
It absolutely is.
It requires routing the irrigation canals through the defensive perimeter without compromising the structural integrity of the walls or providing an entry point for an enemy.
Right. This internal agricultural zone, combined with their extensive moats and thick brick walls, meant that Sri-Kshetra was fundamentally designed to withstand a protracted siege.
Dedicating half of the highly valuable protected space inside a city's walls to farming indicates a very specific calculation. What were the logistical realities of a siege in this era that prompted the Pyu to engineer their capital this way?
Well, in First Millennium warfare, armies rarely had the siege engines necessary to breach a 4.5-meter-thick, solid brick wall.
So they couldn't just knock it down.
No, the primary tactic was to surround the city, cut off the supply lines, and starve the population into submission. A siege could last for months or even years, depending on the agricultural cycle.
I see.
By bringing the rice fields inside the walls, Sri-Kshetra neutralized the primary weapon of a besieging army, starvation. As long as they could maintain their internal water supply and protect the crops, the city could feed itself indefinitely.
And the Burmese chronicles mention shifting alliances and conflicts between different Pyu states, such as Bikthano and Sri-Kshetra.
Right, so in a decentralized network of heavily fortified city-states, the threat of internal conflict between rival Pai cities was ever present. Self-sufficiency during a siege was a strategic necessity for maintaining regional dominance.
But Sri-Kshetra's dominance was not solely based on its defensive capabilities. Its rise to power was directly tied to its geography, specifically its proximity to deep water.
Yes, its position on the Irrawaddy River allowed it to function as a major entrepot.
Because the modern Irrawaddy Delta hadn't yet formed the way it exists today.
Exactly, meaning the coastline was further inland, and ships traversing the Indian Ocean could sail straight up the river to the city.
That geographical advantage completely opened the Pyu civilization to the broader world economy. The Pyu realm functioned as a vital, secure trading corridor connecting the massive markets of China and India.
Yeah, the overland trade routes traversing northern Burma into present-day Yunnan had been highly active since at least 128 BCE.
And the security and infrastructure provided by the Pyu cities made this a preferred route for high-value goods.
It did. The historical sources note that official Roman embassies passed through these specific Pyu overland routes on their way to the Han court in China in the year 97 and again in the year 120.
The overland routes connected directly with the maritime trade, too.
Right.
The sources indicate the Pyu maintained ports along the upper Tenasserim coast. These ports connected the vast maritime networks of the Indian Ocean ships arriving from India, the Middle East, and the archipelago to the overland caravan routes stretching up into China.
And the artifacts uncovered deep inside Pyu walls demonstrate the sheer scale of this economic network.
Archaeologists working at Baekthano have found goods that originated in northwest India, in Java, and as far away as the Philippines.
Yes. And facilitating an international economy of that magnitude requires a highly functional, standardized mechanism of exchange.
Because bartering rice for Roman glass or Javanese spices is inefficient at scale.
Exactly. To solve this, the Pyu developed a sophisticated economic engine. They were the earliest people in mainland Southeast Asia to mint and utilize coinage.
The archaeological evidence shows that starting in the 5th century, originating in the Pegu area, the Pai began producing standardized silver coins.
Yeah, and the mechanics of producing and using these silver coins provide a clear window into their society.
Because these coins weren't stamped with the portrait of a king or inscribed with dates and text, which is what you typically see in Roman or later European coinage.
Right. They relied entirely on specific iconography. The striking process involved placing a blank disc of refined silver between two engraved iron or bronze dies and striking the top die with a heavy hammer.
Which imparts a distinct design on both sides.
Exactly. One side of the coin universally featured a conch shell.
The conch is a deeply auspicious symbol in both Buddhist and Hindu traditions.
It is often associated with water, purity, and the dissemination of Dharma. And the reverse side featured the srivatsa.
What exactly is the srivatsa?
The srivatsa is an ancient, complex geometric symbol, often resembling a flower or an endless knot, heavily associated with the goddess Lakshmi, who represents wealth, fortune, and prosperity.
Using symbols of prosperity on currency makes complete sense. But a significant detail found on many of these silver coins is that they have small holes drilled near the perimeter.
Right.
This indicates they weren't just carried in a pouch or a lockbox.
Exactly. The precise drilled holes indicate the coins were threaded onto string and worn on the body.
This points to a dual-purpose object.
Yes, on one hand, it is a standardized unit of silver, guaranteed by the state, used to facilitate trade with a merchant from India or Java.
And on the other hand,
the iconography of the conch and the srivatsa transforms the silver disc into a protective amulet. The wearer is physically carrying a talisman of prosperity and divine protection.
if you were a merchant navigating the crowded markets of Srikshetra, trading with foreign sailors and caravan leaders, wearing your wealth around your neck as a religious talisman seamlessly blends hard commerce with personal faith.
It really emphasizes how thoroughly integrated finance, daily life, and spirituality were in the Pyu world.
This specialized monetary system was also entirely unique to their era. The sources point out that when the Pyu economic system collapsed in the late 9th century, the use of coinage ceased completely in the region.
It did. Standardized coins did not reappear in the Burmese kingdoms until the 19th century.
The complete absence of coinage for 1,000 years following their decline underscores just how advanced and specialized the Pyu economic machinery was.
It required a high-trust society, reliable access to silver, and a centralized authority capable of standardizing weights and purities.
But the trade routes that carried this silver, the salt from Helene and the luxury goods from the coast, didn't just transport physical cargo.
No, they were conduits for ideas. They carried monks, they carried religious texts, and they carried entirely new philosophies of the divine, leading the Pyu to develop a highly complex, syncretic society.
The religious landscape of the Pyu City-States was profoundly layered. Because of the intense maritime and overland trade, the culture was heavily influenced by Indian traditions.
Right. This is especially evident in the southern coastal cities like Srikshetra, where Pyu royalty even adopted Sanskrit-derived titles, such as Varman.
Which is a suffix commonly used by Indian nobility meaning shield or protector.
Exactly. The sources state that by the 4th century, the predominant religion of the Pyu was Theravada Buddhism.
And the Theravada tradition practiced by the Pyu was heavily influenced by connections to the Andhra region in southeast India, an area closely associated with the great Buddhist scholar Buddhaghosa.
Yeah, Theravada focuses on the monastic discipline and the pursuit of individual enlightenment. However, it's vital to understand that the Pyu realm was not a monolithic, orthodox religious environment.
No, the archaeological finds demonstrate a widespread, peaceful coexistence of various, sometimes competing belief systems.
Right. Alongside the Theravada monasteries, we see significant evidence of Mahayana Buddhism. Excavations have uncovered statues of prominent Mahayana bodhisattvas, such as Avalokiteshvara, known locally as Lakanath and Tara.
We see artifacts pointing to tantric Buddhist practices too.
Yeah. Furthermore, there is a strong, persistent presence of Hinduism, with detailed iconography of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva found within the city walls.
And beneath all of these imported Indian religious traditions, the indigenous pre-Buddhist practices of the Pyu remained firmly entrenched.
They definitely did. One of the most widespread and visible cultural markers of the Pyu was their specific method of handling the dead, urn burial.
They didn't simply bury bodies in the ground.
No.
The sources indicate they would cremate their dead, place the ashes in large urns, and bury them.
Yes, the mechanics of the urn burial practice reveal a deeply ritualized society. The cremation process required substantial amounts of wood and dedicated pyre sites.
And after cremation, the remains were carefully collected.
Right. The urns themselves ranged from highly decorated pottery for the common citizens to massive, intricately carved stone or bronze urns for royalty and high-ranking officials.
Crafting a large stone urn requires hollowing out a solid block of rock.
Which is a very labor-intensive process, demonstrating deep respect for the deceased. But what is truly significant is where they placed these urns.
Where did they place them?
They began burying the urns containing cremated remains in the immediate vicinity of isolated stupas or massive pagodas.
That placement seems like a very deliberate architectural and spiritual choice. They are melding their ancient indigenous practice of ancestral worship with the newly imported Buddhist architecture.
It was a highly effective cultural assimilation. In the Buddhist tradition, a stupa is a mound-like structure specifically designed to house the holy relics of the Buddha or revered saints.
Oh, I see.
By taking their traditional ancestral remains and burying them at the base of these stupas, the Pyu aligned their indigenous reverence for their ancestors with the Buddhist reverence for holy relics.
They physically tethered their familial bloodlines to the sacred architecture of their new faith.
Precisely.
This intense syncretism also highlights some deep cultural contradictions within the society.
It does.
The Chinese Tang Dynasty records provide a very specific, detailed description of the Pyu. The Chinese chroniclers describe them as a profoundly humane and peaceful people.
Right.
They recorded that war was virtually unknown to the Pyu. They noted a strong monastic tradition, stating that boys were sent to monasteries from age 7 to 20 to receive an education.
And the records specifically documented that the Pyu refused to wear actual silk.
Choosing instead to wear a cloth made from silk cotton, purely to avoid killing the silkworms required for silk production.
Yeah, that specific detail about the silkworms paints a picture of a rigidly nonviolent Orthodox Buddhist society adhering strictly to the principle of ahimsa.
Which is the doctrine of non-harming and non-violence toward all living beings.
Right.
The contradiction here is glaring, though. The Chinese records depict a society that refuses to boil a silkworm for clothing. Yet, the archaeological record provides concrete evidence that ceremonial cattle sacrifice and widespread alcohol consumption were mainstays of Pyu life.
Yeah, both of those practices directly violate fundamental Buddhist precepts.
So, are the Chinese records of a perfectly peaceful, silkworm-sparing society an accurate historical snapshot, or are we looking at an idealized, romanticized piece of propaganda?
We're almost certainly looking at a highly curated narrative, essentially diplomatic propaganda.
Right.
The Tang records provide a valuable perspective, but it is the perspective of a foreign court interacting with Pyu diplomats. The Pyu ambassadors likely presented the most refined, orthodox version of their elite monastic culture to the Chinese court.
They wanted to project an image of extreme piety, civilization, and harmlessness.
Exactly. I mean, a society capable of engineering 1,400-hectare cities, building 6-meter-thick defensive walls designed to withstand sieges, and maintaining a monopoly over regional trade is dealing with harsh, violent geopolitical realities.
So the coexistence of high-minded, nonviolent Buddhist doctrines at the elite level with ceremonial cattle sacrifice and animist rituals at the popular level reveals a pragmatic, complex society.
Right, rather than the one-dimensional utopian society described in the chronicles.
Another aspect of their social structure that stands out in the records is the prominence of women. The historical findings and inscriptions indicate a significant presence of nuns and female students operating within the religious and social hierarchy.
Yeah.
This strongly suggests that pre-Buddhist notions of female autonomy and influence remained intact and were integrated into the Pyu cultural framework, contrasting with many contemporary patriarchal societies of the era.
Definitely. And to manage a society with this level of religious syncretism, economic reach, and diplomatic sophistication, the Pyu had to develop highly advanced methods of communication, record-keeping, and intellectual exchange.
The Pyu were an intellectual powerhouse in the region. To administer 18 states, manage complex hydrology, and coordinate international trade, high literacy and a standardized script are mandatory.
Yeah, they are.
The Pyu language belongs to the Tibeto-Burman language family. A fundamental characteristic of Tibeto-Burman languages is that they are tonal. The pitch or intonation used when speaking a syllable completely changes the meaning of the word. And the Pyu became the earliest people in Southeast Asia to adopt Brahmic scripts, which originated in India, to write down their language.
But adopting a foreign script presents a massive mechanical problem.
Right, because the Brahmic script is an abugida, a writing system designed specifically for Indo-Aryan languages, which are not tonal.
Exactly. If your spoken language relies entirely on tone to distinguish between the word for mother and the word for horse, but the script you borrow has no visual mechanism to indicate tone, the written text becomes ambiguous and unreadable.
So how did they solve that?
The Pyu recognized this linguistic incompatibility, and they solved it through highly innovative engineering of the written word. They analyzed the phonology of their own spoken language, and they invented unique tonal markers.
Like specific diacritic symbols carved into the stone alongside the consonants and vowels?
Yes, they integrated these newly invented markers into the borrowed Brahmic script to accurately record the precise intonations of the Pyu language.
Modifying a writing system like that is akin to taking a complex instrument designed for classical music, like a traditional harpsichord, and physically altering the internal mechanics, adding new strings and pedals, just so you can use it to play complex improvisational jazz.
That's a great analogy. The intellectual leap required to deconstruct an imported technology, recognize its limitations, and engineer a modification to perfectly capture the nuances of a tonal language is substantial.
And their linguistic capabilities extended far beyond modifying scripts for their own use. The Pyu cities functioned as vibrant, multilingual hubs of scholarship and administration,
They did. The Pyu language coexisted alongside Sanskrit and Pali.
which functioned as the languages of the court, high religion, and international diplomacy.
Right. Archaeologists have found a massive variety of inscriptions at Pyu sites. They have uncovered fragments of King Ashoka's edicts written in North Indian Brahmi and Tamil Brahmi, dating all the way back to the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE.
And they have also found later inscriptions utilizing Gupta and Kannada scripts from the 4th to 6th centuries.
So the elites in these cities were reading, writing, and conducting statecraft in multiple languages and scripts spanning centuries of Indian intellectual history.
This high culture and multilingualism played a direct strategic role in their foreign policy, too. The sources document that in the year 800 and again in the year 802, the city of Sri-Kshetra sent a formal embassy to the Tang court in Chang'an, the capital of China.
Yes, and these were not just trade delegations.
No, the PO sent 35 highly trained musicians. And the records explicitly note that these musicians played intricate music and sang their songs in Sanskrit.
Sending musicians to perform in Sanskrit is a highly calculated, sophisticated diplomatic maneuver.
Because the journey from Sri-Kshetra to Chang'an involves crossing immense mountain ranges and traveling thousands of miles to reach the center of the Tang Empire, which was arguably the most powerful state in the world at the time.
Right. When those 35 musicians stood before the Tang emperor, they weren't just providing entertainment. By performing in Sanskrit, which was the recognized lingua franca of high religious, intellectual, and courtly culture across Asia, the Pyu were explicitly signaling their advanced civilizational status.
They were demonstrating to the Chinese court that they were not a peripheral barbarian state, but an equal peer, deeply embedded in the highest traditions of Asian scholarship and art.
Exactly. They utilized high culture as a shield to establish diplomatic parity and secure their northern borders.
Their intellectual command extended into complex mathematics and astronomy as well. The Chinese records specifically noted the Pyu expertise in astronomical calculations.
Yeah.
They adopted the Sakra era calendar in the year 80, which was just 2 years after that specific calendar system came into use in India.
And it requires advanced mathematics to align a solar calendar system, calculate leap years, and predict astronomical events.
Later, the sources indicate they adopted a completely new calendar system at Pyu City-States. The first day of this new calendar was set precisely at 22 March 638.
The adoption of that specific calendar at Pyu City-States in the year 638 is a monumental historical event.
How so?
Well, this was a highly accurate, mathematically rigorous lunisolar calendar. It didn't just serve the Pyu for the remainder of their civilization. It endured long after their cities fell.
It eventually became the traditional Burmese calendar.
Yes. This precise system of tracking time, initiated by Pyu astronomers in the 7th century, remains in cultural, astrological, and religious use in Myanmar today. It is a direct, living legacy of Pyu scientific capability.
Unfortunately, high literacy, intricate cosmological calendars, and peaceful diplomacy could not permanently protect the Pyu from the shifting military realities on their northern border.
No, it couldn't.
The millennium-long era of the Pyu City-States eventually faced a geopolitical crisis they could not engineer or negotiate their way out of.
The destabilization of the Pyu network began in the mid-8th century. A powerful militaristic kingdom located to the north in present-day Yunnan, known as Nansao, began expanding its reach.
And the Burman people, referred to historically as the Maranma, were part of this broader northern group under Nansao influence.
Right. According to the Tang Chronicles, aggressive Nansao military raids into the upper Irrawaddy Valley began around the year 754 or 760.
The chronicles describe these invaders as the swift horsemen from the north. The raids intensified throughout the early 9th century. The Nansao hit the Pyu territories in the year 800, again in 802, and a third time around 808.
And then came the catastrophic blow.
The Chinese records state that in the year 832, Nansao warriors overwhelmed the Pyu defenses and sacked the great northern city of Halin.
The historical accounts report that after breaching the walls, the Nansao army systematically looted Halin and took 3,000 Pyu prisoners, forcibly relocating them back to Yunnan to serve as laborers.
And for a very long time, historians treated this single event in 832 as the definitive, sudden end of the Pyu civilization.
Yeah, the accepted narrative was that the swift horsemen arrived, sacked the wealthy salt capital, carried off the population, and the Pyu simply vanished from the historical record overnight.
But relying solely on written chronicles often obscures the reality on the ground.
It really does. The archaeology tells a very different, much more nuanced story.
A civilization of that magnitude, with an extensive, decentralized network of walled cities, deep agricultural surplus, and hundreds of thousands of inhabitants, doesn't vanish overnight because 3,000 prisoners are captured from a single northern city.
Exactly.
The sources note that radiocarbon dating of artifacts at Halin shows significant human activity continued at the site until about the year 870.
Right, that is nearly 4 decades after the reported sack.
So the physical evidence forces us to challenge and discard the traditional collapse narrative.
Yes. The Nansao raids were devastating, but they didn't exterminate the Pyu population. Instead, the repeated military incursions severely fractured the political administration and the defensive coordination of the city-states.
The raids broke the centralized authority that managed the massive irrigation works and trade routes.
Right, which created a profound geopolitical vacuum in Upper Burma. And into that vacuum, the subsequent Burman migration from the north was not a sudden, violent replacement of the population.
It was a slow, gradual demographic transition spanning generations.
Yeah.
The Burmans began migrating south, settling in the fertile regions the Pyu had already cleared and engineered, eventually leading to the birth of the pagan kingdom.
Right.
Traditional historical dates claim Pagan was founded as a fortified city in the year 849. But again, modern science gives us a different timeline.
Yeah, radiocarbon dates taken directly from the ancient walls of Pagan point to the year 980, and the construction of the main walls points to roughly 1020.
The discrepancy between the traditional chronicles and the radiocarbon data means there was a massive overlapping period. Pyu settlements, culture, and language remained active in Upper Burma for roughly 3 centuries after the Nansao raids began.
So the incoming Burmans were slowly consolidating power, gradually taking over the leadership of the realm, village by village, valley by valley.
By the mid-11th century, King Anurata formally founded the Pagan Empire, unifying the entire Irrawaddy Valley under a single banner for the first time.
And how did the Pagan Empire sustain this newly unified state? They didn't reinvent the wheel.
No, they utilized the exact same irrigated regions the Pyu had spent a millennium engineering. The Mulali, the Kayaks Plains, and the Minbu region.
Right. They took over the Pyu dams, the weirs, and the canal networks. They adopted the Pyu methods for cultivating japonica rice.
Even the architectural designs of the great pagan monuments, like the famous Shwezigon Pagoda, are directly based on the earlier Pyu solid stupa designs perfected at Sri Kshetra.
The cultural assimilation of the Pyu by the Durmans was absolute and intentional. The pagan kings actively sought to legitimize their rule over the valley by claiming direct royal descent from the ancient Pyu kings of Sri, etc.
They didn't erase the Pyu, they claimed their legacy as their own.
Exactly. The Pyu language continued to exist and be utilized in official capacities until the late 12th century.
It was only by the 13th century that the distinct Pyu ethnicity and language fully vanished from the written records, having been entirely genetically and culturally absorbed into the new Burman identity. Which leaves us with a deeply reflective question about the nature of conquest and legacy. If an incoming group takes over your land, but they adopt your mathematical calendar to track the seasons, they build their sacred temples based on your specific architectural floor plans, they sustain their population using your ancient irrigation techniques, and their kings claim your ancestors as their own royal lineage. Who really conquered whom?
It's a profound historical paradox. The military structure of the Pyu City-States failed, but their civilization succeeded.
Yeah.
The Pyu didn't die out. They became the genetic, cultural, and structural bedrock upon which the entire pagan empire, and by extension the entire scope of modern Burmese history, was constructed.
It changes how you look at the landscape of history entirely. The physical brick walls of the Pyu City-States eventually crumbled. The 6-meter-thick fortifications at Bigthano, the massive salt-boiling vats at Helen, the imposing, heavily guarded gates of Sri Kshetra, they were either abandoned to the earth, dismantled, or overwritten by time.
Right.
But their invisible architecture remained. The intricate calendar dictating the agricultural seasons, the ingenious tonal script adaptations that allowed a new language to be recorded, the profound religious syncretism that blended ancestral reverence with Buddhist philosophy, and the very concept of massive urban hydrology. All of that invisible infrastructure continues to structure daily life in Southeast Asia over 1,000 years later.
The Pyu proved that a civilization's true and lasting legacy is not necessarily the stone or brick it leaves behind, but the systems, the technologies, and the ideas it plants in the minds of those who follow.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.